Imagine this. It's the late 1960s, and Yvon Chouinard is not your typical businessman. He's a rock climber, a blacksmith, and an environmentalist. He started making climbing gear for himself and his friends, more out of necessity than ambition. But as his products gained popularity, Chouinard found himself at a crossroads. The outdoor industry was growing, and with it, the environmental impact of his products. Rather than ignore the problem, Chouinard faced it head on. In 1972, he made a bold decision. He stopped selling his best-selling product. The iron pittons, which were used by climbers to anchor themselves to the rock, were damaging the very cliffs that climbers cherished. So Chouinard phased them out and introduced aluminum chocks, which didn't harm the rock face. This was no small decision. The pittons were a small, significant part of his business, but Chouinard wasn't driven by profit alone. He was driven by his values. He believed that business could be a force for good, that it was possible to succeed without sacrificing the planet. This story of his leadership is just one example of how he's always put purpose over profit, transforming Patagonia into a company that prioritizes environmental sustainability, leading by example in an industry where that wasn't the norm. From donating 1% of sales to environmental causes to encouraging customers to repair, reuse, and recycle their gear, Chouinard has consistently pushed the boundaries of what it means to be a responsible leader. So, as we dive into his leadership today, let's explore his passion for the outdoors, turned into a lifelong commitment to protecting it, and how his unconventional approach to business and leadership has inspired countless others to rethink what that really means. With that, welcome back to Leaders, a podcast dedicated to exploring the best leaders this world has ever seen. And on today's episode 37, Yvon Chouinard, the co-founder and CEO of Patagonia, one of the most well-known outdoor companies and sustainable companies of today's age. And so that intro story here gives a little bit of context into maybe some of his values as well as some of his leadership style, but let's kind of draw his sort of unconventional path from what we've seen in terms of how he got to where he is today and how the company got to where they are today. So he was first, and perhaps in his own mind remains foremost, a climber, a renowned pioneer of rock and ice routes around the world, and one of the luminaries of the great generation of American post-war outdoor adventurers. Then a blacksmith, he designed and made by hand a host of ingenious new climbing tools, and for a time was the leading manufacturer of climbing equipment in North America. Next, itinerant thrill seeker. The relatively meager proceeds from equipment sales allowed him to continue to pursue an intrepid life of risky recreation in the outdoors. On a van trip from California to the tip of South America in 1968, ostensibly to climb Mount Fitzroy, he and his mates carried a homemade flag that said, "Viva los fun hogs." Chouinard told me, people we met, hitchhikers we picked up, they asked us, "What does this mean, fun hogs?" We said, "Puercos deportivos," sporting porks. Finally, eco warrior. His travels and travails in supposedly wild places awakened him to their ongoing devastation, and he made it his mission, as a man selling consumer goods that he acknowledged people don't need, to try to counteract humanity's regrettable propensity to soil its own nest. In each of these guises, at least, he was authentically countercultural and anti-corporate, a credible advocate for a kind of lawless self-reliance and uncompromising common sense. That sort of gives you how he would kind of view himself in the vein of who he is and who he has become, and a kind of path on where his career has taken him. So really starting with those roots of being an outdoorsman and having that and some ideas for the business kind of root from that directly. And we will take directly from sources here of his book, Let My People Go Surfing, and also a New Yorker profile and a few other articles and clips that we were able to glean from to kind of condense down into what is his leadership style. And this is kind of taken always within kind of his own words as well. And so starting off from that, right, it's definitely unconventional as the way he describes it in terms of his business, the management and leadership style. And so he says, I had always avoided thinking of myself as a businessman. I was a climber, a surfer, a kayaker, a skier, and a blacksmith. We simply enjoyed making good tools and functional clothes that we and our friends wanted. Melinda's and my only personal assets were a beat-up Ford van and a heavily mortgaged, soon-to-be condemned. After we had pondered our responsibilities and financial liabilities, one day it dawned on me that I was a businessman and would probably be one for a long time. It was also clear that in order to survive at this game, we had to get serious. I also knew that I would never be happy playing by the normal rules of business. I wanted to distance myself as far as possible from those pasty-faced corpses in suits I saw in airline magazine ads. If I had to be a businessman, I was going to do it on my own terms. Melinda is much more involved than I am, her husband said. She's more of a micromanager. Still, he told me one day, she has never got up and addressed the company. She won't let anyone take her picture. She's a little bit of a Howard Hughes type. Her mother was the same way. Melinda, Yvonne's wife, and him often argued with our managers for more restrained or natural growth, especially in wholesale. But we pressed those same managers to expand retail and mail order in pursuit of more direct customer relationships and to develop an international business that could help provide balance during weak domestic seasons. So his wife, obviously very involved within the business as well, and he will go on to say more here on his thoughts on management and leadership style. So he used to read business books and study various executive styles and corporate structures here and abroad, but he prefers to take his lessons from nature, from ant colonies, for example. There's no management, he said. Every ant just does his job. They communicate and figure it out. It's like a Navy SEAL team. The whole team has to agree on what the mission is. It's also true, however, that Chouinard, occasionally whimsical notions send the ant scurrying. Absent or not, he's still the big ant. So he definitely pegs himself as more of what we would view as a hands-off leadership, and what he will coin the term as an MBA, or management by absence. So more on his leadership style, but one thing to pin home kind of the founder and entrepreneurship and what his thoughts are on that is that one of his favorite sayings about this is, if you want to understand the entrepreneur, study the juvenile delinquent. Delinquent is saying with his actions, this sucks, I'm going to do my own thing. Since I had never wanted to be a businessman, I needed a few good reasons to be one. One thing I did not want to change, even if we got serious. Work had to be enjoyable on a daily basis. We all had to come to work on the balls of our feet and go up the stairs 2 steps at a time. We needed to be surrounded by friends who could dress whatever way they wanted, even be barefoot. We all needed to have flex time to surf the waves when they were good, or ski the powder after a big snowstorm, or stay home and take care of a sick child. We needed to blur that distinction between work and play and family. Breaking the rules and making my own system work are the creative part of management that is particularly satisfying for me. More on the management style, he was especially interested in books on Japanese or Scandinavian styles of management because I knew the American way of doing business offered only one of many possible routes. I didn't find any American company we could use as a role model. Either it was too large and conservative for us to relate to, or it didn't have the same values. However, there was one company, Spirit, owned by my friends Doug and Susie Tompkins, his first wife, that was contrary and that shared our values. So that'll come back to us here in the mentors section. So Doug Tompkins starts that company, but then he also goes on to found North Face, and it is crazy to think that these two end up being really good friends and ski and travel, climb around the world, but then also form probably the two most well-renowned, most popular sort of outdoor brands there today, Patagonia and North Face, but we'll get into that more. In the mentors section, he's always thought of himself as a 80%er. I like to throw myself passionately into a sport or activity until I reach about an 80% proficiency level. To go beyond that requires an obsession and degree of specialization that doesn't appeal to me. Once I reach that 80% level, I like to go off and do something totally different. That probably explains the diversity of the Patagonia product line and why our versatile, multifaceted clothes are the most successful. We never had to make a break from the traditional corporate culture that makes businesses hidebound and inhibits creativity. For the most part, we simply made the effort to hold to our own particular tradition. At one time, that tradition looked peculiar, but it no longer does. Many American industries have adopted more casual workplaces, and we played a role in starting that trend in growing the business. He continues to practice his MBA theory of management by absence, while I wear-tested our clothing and equipment in the most extreme conditions of the Himalayas and South America. They understand that my so-called MBA style of management is as much a sign of my trust in them as my desire to be out of the office. Again, this desire to be in the outdoors, in the where his product is being sort of used, as well as being trusting in the employees that he's hiring to say he doesn't need to be there and be in the details to make all the decisions and make the company go. And what makes for that? How is he able to do that as well? How you get highly individualistic people to align and work for a common cause is the art of management at Patagonia. Since we can't order our employees around, either they have to be convinced that what they are being asked to do is right, or they have to see it for themselves it's right. Some independent people, until the point arrives that they get it or it becomes their idea, will outright refuse to do a job. In the information age, it's tempting for managers to manage from their desks, staring at computer screens and sending out instructions instead of managing by walking about and talking to people. The best managers are never at their desks, yet can be easily found and approached by everyone reporting to them. When you look to hire management, it's important to know the difference between a manager and a true leader. We've seen this expressed in other forms here, difference between management, sort of manager levels, and a leader. And so Yvon's take on this is, for instance, the branch manager of a bank is expected to avoid risks, not make loans without approval from higher up, implement strategic plans, and keep things running as they always have. It's like the difference between a cook and a chef. They both cook food, but the chef creates recipes and manages the kitchen, while the cook only follows the recipes. Leaders take risks, have long-term vision, create the strategic plans, and instigate change. Actually, that cook and chef analogy back to the Elon Musk episode that we did, which was back on episode 22. Tim Urban, who has wrote extensively about Elon, also kind of looks at the cook and chef analogy there. So it's funny to also bring that into how Yvon sees that too in terms of management and leadership. And so finding the balance between the management problems that come with growth and maintaining our philosophy of hiring independent-minded people and trusting them with responsibility is key to Patagonia's success. Every company also has its ideal size. CEOs in America, not the celebrity CEOs, but those who, without fanfare and jumping jobs every few years, get the work done, found one factor they all have in common. They enjoy working with their hands. So in a sense here, Yvon is saying that from the leadership style, I would say he's hands off, but from the product side and the what he's selling side, he's definitely a hands-on kind of like physical sort of interaction with the product, always kind of testing, thinking of different ways of things that he would use when he would be in the outdoors and climbing and such. So, interesting kind of, I guess, different ways of looking at what you view as hands off, hands on, hands off there. The key to confronting and truly solving any problem is to continue to ask enough questions to get past all the symptoms and reach the actual cause, a form of the Socratic method, or what Toyota management calls asking the 5 whys. He does say the most important mandate for a manager in a dynamic company is to instigate change. When there's no crisis, the wise leader or CEO will invent one, not by crying wolf, but by challenging the employees with change. You might think that a nomadic society packs up and moves when things get bad. However, a wise leader knows that you also move when everything is going too well. Everyone is laid back, lazy, and happy. If you don't move now, then you may not be able to move when the real crisis happens. Teddy Roosevelt said, "In pleasant peace and security, how quickly the soul in a man begins to die." So to really bring this home, Yvon had written sort of a letter to Patagonia employees, I believe, and it was articulating the Patagonia values. And so reading directly from that, I think, will bring home a lot of the points that he articulated via how he thinks about management and leadership, but also kind of framing that into how, as a company, more broadly, he thinks about what the values of Patagonia are. And so he says, we begin with the premise that all life on Earth is facing a critical time, during which survivability will be the issue that increasingly dominates public concern. Where survivability is not the issue, the quality of human experience of life may be, as well as a decline in health of the natural world as reflected in the loss of biodiversity, cultural diversity, and the planet's life support systems. The root causes of the situation include basic values embodied in our economic system, including the values of the corporate world. Primary among the problematic corporate values are the primacy of expansion and short-term profit over such considerations as quality, sustainability, environmental and human health, and successful communities. The fundamental goal of this corporation is to operate in such a manner that we are fully aware of the above conditions and attempt to reorder the hierarchy of corporate values while producing products that enhance both human and environmental conditions. To help achieve these changes, we will make our operating decisions based on the following list of values. They are not presented in order of importance. All are equally important. They represent an ecology of values that must be emphasized in economic activity that can mitigate the environmental and social crisis of our times. All decisions of the company are made in the context of the environmental crisis. We must strive to do no harm. Wherever possible, our acts should serve to decrease the problem. Our activities in this area will be under constant evaluation and reassessment as we seek constant improvement. Maximum attention is given to product quality as defined by durability, minimum use of natural resources, multifunctionalism, non-obsolescence, and the kind of beauty that emerges from absolute suitability to task. Concern over transitory fashion trends is specifically not a corporate value. The board of management recognize that successful communities are part of a sustainable environment. We consider ourselves to be an integral part of communities that also include our employees, the communities in which we live, our suppliers, and customers. We recognize our responsibilities to all these relationships and make our decisions with their general benefit in mind. It is our policy to employ people who share the fundamental values of this corporation while representing cultural and ethnic diversity. Without giving its achievement primacy, we seek to profit on our activities. However, growth and expansion are values not basic to this corporation. To help mitigate any negative environmental consequences of our business activity, we impose on ourselves an annual tax of 1% of our gross sales or 10% of profits, whichever is greater. All proceeds of this tax are granted to local community and environmental activism. At all levels of operation, board, management, and staff, Patagonia encourages proactive stances that reflect our values. These include activities that influence the larger corporate community to also adjust its values and behavior, and that support through activism and financially grassroots and national campaigners who work to solve the current environmental and social crisis. In our internal operations, top management will work as a group and with maximum transparency. This includes an open book policy that enables employees easy access to decisions within normal boundaries of personal privacy and trade secrecy. At all levels of corporate activity, we encourage open communications, a collaborative atmosphere, and maximum simplicity, while we simultaneously seek dynamism and innovation. YC, Yvon Chouinard. So that letter, don't exactly know year of that, but written a little bit ago, and certainly reflects on, I think, where some of the companies are already or are starting to trend / think about sort of that environmental and impact into their communities and things like that. So interesting to kind of just see how the values have sort of upheld over the years, and how other companies, while they may not have been clear or transparent about what they were doing from this standpoint, Yvon always believed that and always kind of has remained the same in that right from the environmental and what their values should stand for. So part of that, in terms of the values too, that can be derived is also what is the mission and what should be their mission statement. And so doing risk sports had taught him another important lesson: never exceed your limits. You push the envelope and you live for those moments when you're right on the edge, but you don't go over. You have to be true to yourself. You have to know your strengths and limitations and live within your means. Same is true for a business. The sooner a company tries to be what it is not, the sooner it tries to have it all, the sooner it will die. It was time to apply a bit of Zen philosophy to our business. The story really is about how we're trying to live up to our mission statement: make the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, and use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. First part of the mission statement, make the best product, is the kind of cornerstone of Patagonia and their business philosophy. Striving to make the best quality product is the reason we got into business in the first place. Product-driven company, without a tangible product, there would be obviously no business, and the other goals of our mission statement would thus be irrelevant. Having high-quality, useful products anchors our business in the real world and allows us to expand their mission. So Patagonia, in addition to the mission, the values, they also set out standards from their design standpoint. Is it functional? Is it multifunctional? Is it durable? Does it fit the customer? So they ask a lot of different questions that go into, are they designing for the core customer? So that all the designs and frameworks that they put into place have these things in mind as well. So a clear sort of synthesis of all of that. And so they didn't get there overnight, though. I mean, this took several iterations to get to the Patagonia that we know today. And so part of that, in terms of the evolution of the business, was some challenges and failures along the way. So first one, I think we said, was Chouinard equipment and the Piton crisis. So the earliest challenge he faced was that first business, and they specialize in that climbing gear. They were the largest supplier of climbing hardware in the U.S., but the company faced a significant ethical and environmental dilemma, as we alluded to in the beginning kind of story. The pins, they were widely used by climbers, caused that damage to the rock faces, and so they made up 70% of his revenue at that point. It was a major financial risk. Company faced a potential collapse, but he turned that failure into an opportunity by developing that clean climbing gear, such as aluminum chocks, which were less harmful to the rock. And that really set the precedent for the environmental ethos that they would define Patagonia. They kind of encountered before that almost first crisis, a surplus of poorly made rugby shirts from a factory in Hong Kong, nearly bankrupt them. As Chouinard later wrote, we learned the hard way that there was a big difference between running a blacksmith shop and being in the rag business. A pan of a Chouinard pack in Backpacker in 1974. How well would you expect ironmongers to sew? Amid the fallout, the Frost sold the Chouinards their share, making Yvon and Melinda the sole owners. So they had some financial instability in the early days of Patagonia. So when they transitioned from making that climbing gear to launching as a outdoor clothing brand, struggled with that. Despite the success of their products, they faced a challenge of maintaining profitability. So in the 80s, they expanded rapidly, but this growth led to cash flow problems. Company was overextended. Chouinard had to lay off 20% of his workforce, a painful decision that went against his values of treating employees like family. It was a wake-up call for him, leading him to refocus on sustainable growth. And later on in the early 90s, the organic cotton crisis, so he became aware of damage caused by conventional cotton farming, using large amounts of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. Patagonia was heavily reliant on cotton for its clothing line, and Revolution posed another ethical dilemma. And so he decided to switch entirely to organic cotton, despite the fact that it was more expensive and difficult to source. Transition was fraught with challenges, including supply chain disruptions, cost, resistance from within the company. He persisted. By 1996, they fully committed to doing that. Switch definitely hurt them, short-term profitability, but ultimately, again, reinforced them being a leader in that space. The Don't Buy This Jacket campaign, which was in 2011, they launched that during Black Friday, encouraging customers to think twice before purchasing new products and to consider environmental impact of their consumption habits. It was praised for its bold stance, but also posed significant risks. Definitely a gamble, challenged that consumerism, real risk, it could backfire, lead to a significant drop in sales, but the opposite happened. They increased sales with that, so always challenging conventional nature here, and definitely a risk, but one that was worth taking. Legal and financial struggles, we see this with a lot of the different companies and business leaders. They're inevitably going to be encounter if they become successful. So in the late 80s, Chouinard Equipment faced a series of lawsuits related to climbing accidents involving their gear. That strain led to bankruptcy of Chouinard Equipment in 89, pivoting them to the Patagonia outdoor clothing. That was a setback, protecting integrity of the brand and the jobs. He reorganized that business, and that later led to the creation of Black Diamond Equipment, which is still a very successful outdoor equipment company, and continuing that legacy of that climbing gear under new ownership. Definitely Patagonia's unique challenge in being at the forefront of a lot of these things is to balance growth with the environmental ethics piece of it. So business expansion with that, so pressure to scale up and meet consumer demand while also trying to minimize their ecological footprint is going to be one that they'll continue to face, and other companies will soon encounter too. So final section here will be mentors and heroes, and so the aforementioned Doug Tompkins, the North Face founder, shared a deep bond with him, rooted in their mutual love for nature and commitment to conservation. Tompkins was a visionary who saw business as a means to support environmental causes. His friendship and mentorship with him extended beyond climbing. It was about how they could use their success to protect the planet. In the 90s, they took a trip to Patagonia where they discussed the destructive impact of consumerism on the environment. Trip was pivotal for both of them, solidified their commitment to environmental activism. Tompkins already sold his shares in his spirit to focus on conservation, encouraged Chouinard to align his business model with environmental goals. And Doug's wife, Chris Tompkins, said, Yvon is a kind of a genius. He can also be a knucklehead. The thing about Yvon and Doug Tompkins, though they weren't alike in personality at all, they shared an extraordinary confidence in themselves and were completely unburdened by conventional thinking or the wise advice of others. They calculated risk better than most. I was in both cases the conservative one, the one always wringing my hands. Second person here, Tom Frost, was more than just a climbing partner for him. He was a mentor in both climbing and life. Most notable stories being from their collaboration in the early days of Chouinard equipment. Frost was an engineer, designer who believed in the principle of clean climbing, emphasizing leaving no trace on the rock. And that philosophy, again, was used with the shift from pitons to the aluminum, which caused damage. And his mentorship taught him about importance of sustainability, respect for nature. In the late 1960s, they embarked on a climbing trip to Yosemite. During this time, they began to see negative impact of that gear. Frost, he was meticulous and thoughtful, guided Chouinard in developing that gear that was less damaging, leading to the creation of that clean gear. That collaboration was not just about innovation, fostering a deeper ethical approach to climbing. Finally, Fred Beckey was a legendary climber known for his relentless pursuit of first ascents and exploration. Yvon learned about the spirit of adventure and perseverance from him. Beckey was known for his unconventional and rugged lifestyle, often living out of his car and climbing in remote areas. Chouinard also admired his dedication to exploration, ability to navigate uncharted territories. Chouinard and Beckey teamed up for a climbing expedition in the Canadian Rockies. Beckey, always on the lookout for new routes, led them up a remote and challenging face. The climb was grueling and conditions were harsh, but his determination and resourcefulness left a lasting impression on Chouinard. He learned from Beckey that the journey and the struggle were just as important as the summit, a lesson that would shape his approach to business and life. So with that, we will wrap up episode 37 on Yvon Chouinard. Definitely a unconventional leader of his own right. One that was probably fairly unique and different from a lot of the different other traditional sort of business leaders that we've studied. His approach to leadership and to life is, I think, much different. But works for him and has worked, obviously, for Patagonia to lead him to his successful business on staying true to a long-enduring set of values and mission for the company. So thank you for listening to this episode of Leaders Podcast. We will be back here soon for episode 38.